On the bench today, we have an MS661cm. Now, this has already been declared a total loss slash outrageous repair bill from a dealer or another shop. This is how I got it. I have no idea if everything's in here or not, but we'll figure it out. The short answer is, see if I can get you in. This is really tough, but you can see that. She's scored pretty good. I was told that this was straight gassed during the storm by a semi-professional weekend warrior. Let's take it apart and see what's inside. We'll try and do this at the speed of smell. Shouldn't take too terribly long. I have a piston for it. Again, this is not going back to, I may have already pulled the top off of this, I don't know. Unfortunately, this has been sitting here for a long time. And it was delivered to me from one of my commercial customers. Yeah, this has been off. Well, that didn't get straight gassed. Something happened because she scored up. Feel pretty confident we'll be able to get her done, so to speak. Let's take a few more things off of here. I don't know how much run time's on this, but let's just say not much. I'll get you in here and you can take a look at this. So the reason why I say no, it's not straight gassed, is because there would be scoring on the intake side of the piston. So how that happens is, let me back you out a little bit. So as your fuel and air mix comes in here, this is the farthest part away from combustion. So you got cool fuel and air hitting the face of this piston coming in through this port right here. All right, so if there were no lubrication in the gas, this side would look just like that side. We do have some ground up stuff. We're gonna flush the case. I had somebody ask me, what is this flush the case thing? So we're gonna clean this out. I'm gonna fill this up with saw gas, mixed gasoline, and flush, rotate, flush, rotate, flush, rotate, flush, rotate. And then we're gonna listen to the bearing and see how it does. But big end of the bearing has not got any thermal color change to it. So we should be able to clean this cylinder up with some sandpaper, take the aluminum transfer off of here. We're gonna slap a Meteor piston on there. These are fantastic, typically for pro saws that go back to pro customers. They get OEM equipment only. This is going to be a part-time use saw, so there's a $40-50, it's half price for a Meteor, and the Italians do a fantastic job. Got good quality rings in here, blah blah blah. All right, so before I clean this up, we'll just take a look at it. And what this is right there, that's melted aluminum, and this plating in here is harder than woodpecker lips. So the idea is we're going to sand this off without digging through the couple of millimeter, or excuse me, a couple of, I think this is like maybe 3 or 4 thousandths worth of plating that's on here, and we're gonna get all that ugly out of there and then just clean up the rest of it. That's more just like a witness shadow. There's no damage there. Obviously the piston would show damage on that side if there was any. So let me clean this up and we'll be right back. Okay, that cleaned up pretty nice. Everything's still in good shape. If you look really, really, really close, there's a low spot right there. That's a like a tiny gouge in the plating. And you can see a couple of those same things up there at the very top. That won't hurt it. If this was going back into commercial service to be used every day, all day, I would say let's just do a new top end. But for weekend warrior, this will last a long, long time. All right, let's get this crank flushed out, and you'll see what I'm talking about in here. If we can get, I don't know if I can get some light down in here. You know, there's a fair amount of ook. You know, that's oil, but there's debris in there. And then you can see, you know, from where this has been off. So let me flush this, you know, and again, all I'm going to do is just pour some saw gas in here. I'm going to take the piston off so I can just easily cycle this. Flush, 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 flush. I'll probably do it, you know, 6 or 8 times until when I'm dumping it out, the gas is clear and free of any kind of debris. Then we'll go back in and manually relube each ball bearing on each side and make sure that it, you know, it feels good. It doesn't feel crunchy. This didn't get burned up nearly as bad as some of them do. Okay, that cleaned up nice. No debris, no dirt, no nothing. Stuck on the magnet right there. But, you know, she's nice and clear. And like I said, we're going to manually oil up these bearings with just a light shot of 2-stroke oil, just so we're good to go. And then we can install our new piston, get that top end back on, and then find out if we got all the stuff to put this back together. All right, I got the piston back in, top end's bolted down. That doesn't look like it belongs there. I had to take this off a part saw. You know, I can't say for sure, and I highly doubt that this decomp's bad. We can test it here, and I can show you, but you can actually see there's melted plastic right there. And typically, if this leaks bad enough, you won't have enough compression to run the saw. You know, I've seen them where this gets bent, and it won't seal, and it'll kind of run, and that... But best I can tell, this is not, as I rotate it around, it's not bent. So I've got like a little handy dandy manifold thing right here. Let's plug this thing in and see if it leaks like a sieve. No, it's holding. I mean, you know, it's in there and... let's inspect the carburetor and see if there's any surprises in here. Can't really put my finger on why this, besides operator error. I mean, I just, you know, there's some bluing on here, but it's not too bad. Nothing just jumps out at me. We're going to pressure test this, you know, and I was waiting to get the cylinder back on here so we could pressure test the crankcase and make sure that it's tight and correct. Aside from just, I hate to rule out, oh, it's operator error when the saw is burned up. So let's see if we can't do our due diligence before we pull the cord on this and pinpoint a failure. Okay, after 4 minutes, we've lost 4 pounds, and it's coming from this decomp valve. I'm going to take this out and lap that valve with some valve compound. Just use some fine. I'm going to touch it up, and that should get that sealed tight. It's leaking so slow right now that really isn't going to affect it, but oh, whatever. Okay, that's got it all sealed up. And yeah, I've washed all the other stuff, so when we go back together, we look pretty good. This saw was missing, and I've only had one saw ever brought to me taken apart that had all the fasteners. This is missing all the muffler bolt stuff, both of these. But I've got some spare screws, and we'll get all that back together again. When they took this apart, you got to be really gentle. These gaskets for the exhaust, I actually have a spare. We're going to put that back together. It's actually pretty important. You'll end up with an exhaust lead up here at the top and the bottom, and you could potentially, over time, you know, melt some plastic on the plastic shroud up here, or get enough heat down to this gasket where it may fail. Right there. Okay, you don't want that excess heat. I'm putting this back together, and I looked down and I dodged a bullet here because I thought, oh gracious, I'm gonna have to split this case. The gasket, you can see the gasket material right there. See how it's pulled out a little bit, but there's still enough right in there to hold everything. These had like a tag in that came down here that weren't held in place by anything. So if some stray branch flicked that out, it would peel it out and then pull it out from right here, and then all the oil would come out. On the bright side, this has been sitting for months in my shop, and thank goodness there's still a bunch of oil in here, so it is not leaking. Yeah, the only repair for that is a case split and new case gasket. Woof, dodged a bullet. Okay, saw's all back together. And, you know, again, I don't think I got like the full story because this came from, you know, somebody's friend. I didn't meet the owner of this saw. But after closer inspection, 83 successful starts. If I can read this scratch right, saw's got 10 hours, 3 minutes, 53 seconds on it, 254 unsecful stirks. Let's see. It's like low side's 54, high side's 73, and max RPM was 1330. So somebody plugged this in. That's an awful lot of unsuccessful storks. If this thing doesn't act right off the rip, I'm gonna whoa up and dig into this a little bit more. You know, maybe there's something up with the carburetor. I did inspect the carburetor. Diaphragm looks fantastic. No trash in the carb, no nothing. But I don't know. I don't think I'm to the bottom of this. And this took me longer. Even though it's like a 10-hour saw, it was in pieces. Had to go find some fasteners and some other stuff. So, you know, it's oh yeah, it'd be fun. Fix chainsaws for a living. All right, super duper quick. I actually got to run this in some real wood. I got some small stuff out there. It doesn't seem like it wants to pick up the RPM. I'm not going to run it through a recalibration because I don't think that truly shows me what the saw does. Many times I've run a recalibration and it'll do that, but it'll still have some issues. So let's go to the wood pile. All right, we're back at the shop and I have my reservations. Does it run, rev, and cut? Seems to do fine, but it runs hot. You know, it's hard to tell. You know, the plug looks nice and brown. I'm running Motul at 40-to-1 just because that's what I had handy. You know, it doesn't burn super duper clean, so that looks, I didn't clean the plug beforehand. Nothing's hurt. You know, my piston still looks perfectly fine. It's hard to get that without the glare. Anyway, so on these M-tronic carburetors, on the 661s, and so you've got a, oh gosh, let me get my glasses on. All right. So you've got a fuel solenoid right there. Okay, so that is your low and high screw. Then you've got a throttle position sensor. And then you've got a temperature sensor that's built into this. And I just didn't notice it wanting to modulate the tune at all. So with that being said, everything else here, of course, it's been vacuum and pressure tested. And because this saw only had 10 hours on it and it was blown up, you know, when you order a brand new carburetor from Stihl, you don't get, I think you get a solenoid, but you don't get this doohickey on the side. I want to say that's like another $75 spend. So I think it's going to be easier just to replace this with a takeoff. I've used this guy many times. So what he'll do is he'll buy a brand hammer new chainsaw, professionally take it apart, and then he sells pieces and parts. Where's my cursor at? So here we go. This unit comes complete with this side module and a new solenoid. So this way I don't have to test, you know, swap test, swap test, swap test. If I plug this into the MDG, it is not going to tell me what's wrong. So, you know, that's a real spin. You know, by the time we're done with a little bit of shipping and some tax, you know, we're at a $200 bill. But I can't just take this and hand it back in good conscience that this is going to last, because the saw just runs too hot. You know, you can, when you don't have M-tronic and you're adjusting with screws, the good thing to do is just cup your hand over here after it's run, you know, not while the chain's moving, dummy. But, you know, just cup your hand over here and feel. And it should be warm. You know, it shouldn't be like hot, like, ooh, that's, you know, it's like hairdryer hot. You know, not heat gun hot. If that makes any sense. The saw's not getting enough fuel, and it's not going to last like it is. So we're going to put this on the shelf, order up a carburetor assembly, and hopefully that will get us right as rain. The only other part of the M-tronic is the ignition module, and I feel pretty certain that that's doing everything it's supposed to do. So thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one. All right, it's a week later, and here's my old carburetor, the new carburetor from eBay, the takeoff that was, you know, a complete assembly is on here. I touched up the chain a little bit. I think I hit like some dirt, not dirt, but I think there was some dirt in the bark. And so I'm ready to run this and interested to see if the carburetor swap is going to be my final approval stamp before I turn this loose and give it back to the owner. Let's load up, go to the wood yard, and do a little bit of cutting and see how it reacts. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple of things. Oh gosh, look at that. Whew, somebody turned the air conditioner on here in South Carolina today. It was 71 yesterday. High today is 46, 44, something like that. And I know you folks in colder climates will say, ah, that's nothing. Just a big change from yesterday. The reason why I don't like to do, you know, what you're supposed to do when you put a new M-tronic part on is you're supposed to run a recalibration. Unfortunately, that won't tell me if the saw runs right. That just means it's not so screwed up that it won't run a recalibration process. You know, I know I've got a good crankcase and new piston and all this other stuff, so running it is the best way to tell if it's like it's supposed to be, rather than just running it through a calibration and sending it. Because if I had done that, I feel like it would have come back to me burn up again. So without being too terribly long-winded, we're gonna fire this up. But again, I could not put my finger on specifically why this saw failed at such a low hour. You know, I hate to say, oh, it was operator error, because I can't prove that. So let's fire this thing up and see if it'll play nice. Now, this is a cold start on a dry carburetor, so I'm gonna hang it out there. It's gonna take at least, you know, 6 or 7 pulls. Now, you could hear that on that very first cut. Go back and watch it again. You'll hear it four-stroking. It's gurgling. It's like... And then as the best way and the fastest way to get these to tune, you notice I wasn't cranking. Long, steady, firm cuts. And it started dialing it in, started cleaning up the four-stroke. Then you hear the RPM get higher, and that was just in the first cut. And then it started in the second cut, it settled the RPMs down. It was like, oh, I'm building some heat, back off, a little bit more gas, don't get too hot. That's how M-tronic works. How many RPMs can I get without going over this heat limit? So I feel much better about this. When I cut my hand around there, it felt warm like a hair dryer, not hot like a heat gun. So I'm gonna call this a win. See you back at the shop. Sorry, I'm really sniffly. Okay, so a couple things to address at the end of this. You know, you listen to too many dumbass people on the internet and they're like, oh, it takes, 7 tanks of gas for the M-tronic system to accurately tune, or it takes multiple tanks. Look, if you saw it in real time in a very short clip of the video of me just firing up the saw cold and how fast it was making tunes. Now, part of that was how I was running the saw. The less it has to react to my input, if I can maintain nice, steady pressure, it will make those micro changes faster. If I'm dogging it in and coming off and dogging it in and coming off, it's only got a couple of seconds while it's under a load to make an adjustment. You follow me? And even Stihl says it only takes 3 bar length cuts to have the saw. We'll just say like 98% in tune. Something else you should do once you get it up to full operating temperature like that is let it idle for about 20 seconds on the ground. Just let it, because now that you've got it up to full operating temperature, running it under a full load, the engine temperatures come up, and so what you've done is basically set the high jet for your carburetor, and now letting it idle, it will make those micro changes to find the sweet spot where it wants to be under or at idle. So the next time this gets fired up, those settings are there, and if it needs to make any difference for the fuel mix or the temperature or the humidity or whatever, it will make those micro changes. But if I understand correctly, these sample it like 10 times a second, and obviously it's not making sweeping changes, it's making small changes. Clean it up, you're not getting enough RPM. And I could feel, I actually felt like a little bit of heat, and then that second cut, the heat started to come down, and that's what I wanted to see, and that's what you can't get from just going outside, running it through a recalibration and say, it's fixed. Doesn't work that way. I want to hear those changes in tune. I want to know the M-tronic system is working like it's supposed to. And that was a textbook example of the saw operating like it's supposed to, making changes like it's supposed to, building that heat and going, okay, a little bit more fuel. I need to fatten it up. We're getting a little hot. And then it'll sit there and just keep trying to find that just ideal tune. Micro changes. This video has been long enough. Thank you so much. If you're here at the end, for everybody that's 15,000 subscribers, for something I do part-time just to share some information with you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's all I got to say about that. On to the next one. See you later.